Would you believe me if I told you we only scratched the surface about methods in our last video? Well, let's find out more in this video. Hey, it's T from the Breakthrough Code channel, where we try and make coding fun and simple to understand. Make sure you stick around to the end because I'm going to show you some interesting things about methods that we haven't already covered. Also, I'm going to introduce you to a concept about methods that may change the way you see them going forward. It certainly did for me, so stick around for that too. Right, so what more can we do with method parameters? Well, we already know that methods have method parameters and we use them to pass data into our methods. So we can perform some sort of action on those parameters that we passed in, okay? As you can see in this code snippet, we've got two parameters, integer parameters that we've passed into this method, and then we're performing an addition on these two parameters and returning a result, okay? This is just an example of your everyday parameter, but we have others too. We have the named parameter, which we can pass parameters to a method using the name. With this method, we don't have to pass it in the order specific to the method signature. We also have the out parameter. Using the out keyword, we can define out parameters in a method. We can use this to return multiple values from a method. We have the ref parameter, which is where we obviously pass in the parameter by reference. We have default and optional parameters. This allows us to optionally pass parameters into a method. And finally, we have the params array. We can use this to pass a number of values as one parameter. Right, now here's a little concept about methods I want to introduce you to, obviously. Value versus reference. When we pass data into a method, we can pass it in one of two ways. One as a value and the other as a reference. When we pass data in as a value, okay, the original variable doesn't get altered. But when we pass it in as a reference, it's altered based on what's going on in the method we've just passed it into. So for example, when we create a variable, we're effectively creating a memory location, okay? Now, when we pass this variable in by value type into a method, okay, giving it a parameter name of number, we are then creating another memory location. So changes to this variable doesn't affect this original variable. However, when we pass in variables by reference, they both point to the same memory location. So which means if I put a variable, I declare a variable of count and say initialize it to 10, okay, and I pass that into a method that has a parameter called number, okay, and this number sets the this number is set to 40, for example. That's going to affect the count variable as well because they're both sharing this same memory location. But enough about the theory. Let's go check this out in Visual Studio. Okay, so let's first of all look at the basic value parameter, probably the most used one we are familiar with. So if I create a method, so static void, and I'm calling it switch number, okay, and this method takes in one parameter called int number, okay, and it will set that number to 40. Cool. Okay, now in the main method, when I declare an integer of count, okay, and I'm going to set that to 10, okay, now when I pass that integer into this method switch number by invoking it here, I've got to spell it right first, let me just use IntelliSense, and I pass in count, what do you think count is going to be when we print that out to the console? Okay, and bear in mind this is the value. I'm passing it into this method as a value type. Let's see what the console says. Okay, if your answer was 10, then you are absolutely right. And that's because count and the number 10 both point... sorry. Count and the variable number both point to different memory locations, as I showed you in the slide. They both point to different memory locations. So therefore, one change to one doesn't affect the other. Okay. Now let's try this again, but with the ref keyword, and let's see if that has any effect. Let's pass this variable of count as a reference to this method, and we do that by first of all saying that this method accepts references. Okay, and we use the ref keyword to say that this parameter is a reference parameter, and then we also need to use the ref keyword here that we're passing in this variable as a reference key, as a reference here. Now, what do you see? What do you guys think this this time what do you think basically is going to get printed to the console? Let's have a look. Let's run that. Okay, it printed 40 this time. Okay, and this is obviously because, as the slide showed, both count and number are pointing to the same memory location, because we passed the variable in as a reference type. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Okay, now let's look at some other parameter options we have. Okay, so we have the out parameter, for example. So let's do some maths to show this as an example. Let's get rid of all this. I know math isn't most people's favorite subject, but I'll try and be clear in this example. Okay, so we want to first of all declare a radius of a variable. So double radius equals 7. Okay, now we want to create a method that can do various calculations for a circle. For example, give us the area and the circumference of a circle. Okay, so just to be clear, we're going to use the out keyword in this scenario to return multiple. We're going to create one method basically, and we're going to have that method return multiple variables. So let's declare that method. So static double is what the first variable it's going to return, and we're going to do calculate circle. Okay, and we're going to pass in a double of radius as a value type. Double radius. Okay, and then we're going to use the out keyword to get our other variable that we're going to return from this method, and it's going to be area. Okay, so let's first of all calculate the area. Okay, we're going to utilize the math class in this. Okay, so we've got math.pi, which gives us pi, obviously, which is the pi constant, and then we've got math.pow, which allows us to basically say that the radius is squared. Okay, that's what math.pow does for us. And then we want to basically math.pi times by the squared version of or our radius squared basically, and that should give us the area. Okay, now we want to get the circumference as well, so we create a double to get the circumference. Let me spell that correctly. Circumference, hopefully that's correct, and equals 2, and this is the equation for circumference is 2 times by math.pi, so pi, okay, times by the radius. Okay, and that should give us the circumference, and we want to return the circumference, if I can spell return correctly. Return circumference. Okay, and that's it. So right, okay, so let's see what we get when we invoke this in our main method. Okay, so first of all, we want to call that method again. We want obviously a variable to put our circumference value in. Circumference, can't spell that, rents. Okay, And then we want to invoke this calculate circle, but we want to pass the radius in as a value type, okay? And then we want to get the area out of that. So we declare the out keyword again, and then we say double and an area, and that should return to us the area as well as the circumference. So now we can print that to the console. So we can print the circumference to the console. Let's use string interpolation there to say that this is the circumference. So we can identify that when we print it out to the console. Ooh, I don't want count in there. I want copy circumference in there. Cool. I think that's about it. And then we also want to print out area to the console as well. So we'll go area, give a space there, and then we put area. Okay, and then we just put the double quotes again to end that. Okay, so when we print that, that should do both calculations and give us a result for the circumference and the area. Brilliant. Okay, so now we've basically invoked that one method but been able to return two results. How cool is that? Okay, so now let's look at the parameter array example. Okay, so don't worry guys, I'll make this a bit more simple for us so that you don't have to worry about super complex maths if that was complex for you. Say we want to create a method that returns the sum of every number we passed into it. So we want a simple method, but we don't know how many numbers the user is going to pass into that method. So let's say static int some numbers. Okay, normally, or well, what you're used to so far is declaring parameters as such for multiple variables you want to pass in. So for example, int numbers, int number 2, int number 3, and so on and so forth. But the problem with doing this is that it doesn't allow us to be flexible with the amount of numbers that we can pass in. So if we don't know what the caller is going to pass in, the amount of numbers the caller is going to pass in, this isn't going to be very helpful. Well, that's where the params array comes in. We can do specify the params array by doing a params, using the params keyword, and then type in int as the data type we want passed in. We specify the array keyword, the array shape with these two square brackets, and then we give it a name, okay? And then what we want that to do is do some sort of calculation to sum up all the numbers that's passed in, okay? So how do we calculate the numbers, the sum of all the numbers passed in? We can do something like this. We can have a variable that we can stick the sum in, okay? We'll call that sum. Then we'll have a for each loop, okay? Because we want the for each loop to basically loop through the array of numbers, and for each number we want to do something. We basically want to add that to our sum variable here. So basically we can say sum plus e equals, IntelliSys has done it for us, I. Okay, and then at the end of this we want to return sum. Okay, cool. Okay, so basically, obviously, as I said, this is going to loop through this array and obviously add that to the sum of that and return that. Okay, add that each item in the array to this sum variable and then return that. Okay, so how do we invoke that? Well, there's two ways we can invoke that with the params. We can go int sum equals some numbers, and look, we can just pass in the numbers that we want to add. So we can go 3, 4, 5, 6 and keep going if we wanted to. Let's go to 11, for example, in this instance, and finish that off. Okay, or we can also invoke it by creating an array variable. So int array numbers equals new int array. Oops, we don't want it to be sum in there. We can do that, int array numbers, and we can pass all these numbers in like we did above, or we can just copy that in there, and that would just work nicely. And that we can do that, and then once we've done that, we can invoke that method again, some numbers. This time, actually, we'll put it, the result of that, into another variable called sum2. Okay, and we'll have that as, I don't know what I've done there, Control Z that, we'll have that as some numbers, and we'll pass this array variable in like that, and that should work nicely as well. Cool, so we've passed in a list, a list of numbers, or a collection of numbers, either this way, or we can declare an array and pass that in as well. And those are the two ways we can invoke this method. Cool, so now we can print that to the console, and hopefully that should give us the same number as a result. So sum and sum2, I'm just being lazy and letting IntelliSense do that for us. So if we run that, there we go, we get 66 and 66. How cool is that? Okay, we can even get rid of this here. If we didn't want to do all that extra typing, it's already inferred that this is an int array on this side, so we can get rid of that like that, and it still works fine. When we run that, still get the same result. Cool. Now, params also let you do something else. It allows you, or it allows your parameters of your method to be optional. Okay, so for example, if I didn't want to provide anything for these parameters, I could do that as well. Get rid of that, get rid of that, and it wouldn't complain at all. It'd be happy with that. Okay, but if I was to get rid of the params keyword, okay, so basically that would just turn this to a method that just basically accepts an integer array. It wouldn't be happy with you not providing an argument to this method here. It would complain, and it also wouldn't be, it definitely wouldn't be happy if you did this as well. Okay, that only works in the params when this is a params. Okay, it doesn't work when it's an array, but it does work obviously if you pass in an array variable as such. As you can see, it's not complaining there, but it did when we do use this method. Okay, cool. Now let's move on to something else. Okay, we can, oh yeah, one more thing I just wanted to be clear about, okay, because I use a term there that you may not be familiar with. I use the term arguments. Okay, so just to be clear, when these are parameters, so when we have a method and we're declaring a method here, when we get to this part of the method signature, yeah, this is the method signature, this is the parameter. Okay, these are the parameters, these are where the parameters goes, as I've gone through with you in this tutorial. However, this is called arguments. When we pass variables or into these, when we invoke a method and we pass in a variable, this variable is known as an argument. So when it's over here, it becomes a parameter, but when it's here and it's being invoked, this is an argument that we're passing in. Okay, cool. Just to be clear, because I've used that word a few times and you may not be familiar with it. Okay, some more useful tips about params. They have to be the last in the list of your parameters for your method. Okay, so if you have more than one parameter, like for example, if I just get rid of all this here, and let me get rid of it properly, and I just put an integer here. I have to give it a name, obviously, int a. Okay, what happened here? Oh, I'm doing it in the wrong place. Let me get rid of that again. I put int a here. Okay, cool. As you can see, you can do this. It's happy because it's the last. Oh, actually, sorry. I have to declare this as params. Okay, cool. Params. Cool. So you aren't getting any complaints because it's the last position in our list of parameters. Okay, but you can't do this. I can't now move this over here. Int x. I can't do that, okay? It's not gonna work, okay? And I also can't do this as well. Have more than one params option. So I can't write. I already have a params here. I can't go and say I want another params here. So a params int array r2. I can't do that. It's not going to be happy with that. Okay. So sorry guys. Right. So to wrap up what we've seen so far, we've seen a method that is your value that passes in parameters as a value type. So for example, void wrap up, we'll call this wrap up. Okay, now we're passing in this params as a value type. Okay, we've seen that version. Okay, and that seems to work fine. Okay, we've seen one using the ref keyword where we pass in params as using the ref keyword. Okay, then we've also seen the out keyword where we use the out keyword to pass in a variable. Okay, as well. Okay, and then we've also seen the params keyword as well as an example. Params int array count. Okay, we've seen the params. Okay, so there's one we haven't seen, which is the default or optional parameters. Okay, so this one's pretty easy. I'm going to create another method that just basically adds two numbers together. Okay, so static int, it returns an int. Okay, it's called add. Okay, and it adds two numbers together, but one of the variables is going to be a value type. It's going to pass in the parameter as a value, but the other is going to have a default parameter or optional parameter, and when you don't pass a value into it, it will default to 2. So that's how we declare that. Okay, cool. So I wanted to return those two numbers added together. Okay, so now let's go over here and we can say add 2. Okay, so I'm invoking this method, but I'm only passing in one argument. Okay, so because I'm only passing in one argument, okay, it's only going to it's going to assign this argument to this value, this parameter here called x. But this parameter, since it doesn't have a argument passed in, it's going to default to 2. So if we print this to the console, and here's another cool way to print to the console, we can do console.writeLine and declare this variable, this method, invoke this method directly into the to the console.writeLine. It should print 4 because we're passing in 2. We're not passing in a value for this. So it'll be 2 plus 2 and it should print 4. Cool, it does. Brilliant. Okay, now if we do pass in another argument for y, so we go to 8. So now we're passing in 2 here and we're overriding the default value because we're passing in 8 here. So when we add these two numbers together, it should be 2 plus 8, which would give us 10. Let's see if that works. Brilliant, it does work. Okay, but there's a few gotchas with this default params. Okay, similar to the this default parameter, similar to the params, we can't have, it has to be the last position for the default value. We can't then go and do something like this. It's not gonna be happy. It doesn't like that. Okay, but we can do something like this where we have multiple default values, whereas we couldn't do that with the parameter. Okay, but we can do that with, oops, I've already used y, let's use b, s, yeah, why not s, but we can do this. Okay, cool. Okay, just one more thing I want to show you, which is the named parameter. I think I skirted over that. Okay, again, we can do that with this method in by giving the method params two variables, two parameters, one called numbers one called number and the other called number2. Okay, so when I invoke this, okay, when I invoke this method up here, before, what we've done is we've passed in fact, let me yeah, that's fine. Okay, before we actually no, what we'll do is we'll change this to print number. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll get rid of that and we'll say console.writeLine. We'll do a console.writeLine and we'll print number1. We'll print number. We'll do string interpolation to identify what number is, and that should be number. Okay, and then we'll use console.writeLine again for number2. Let's see how that works. Okay, so we'll do console.writeLine there, and we'll go number2 so that we know that that's the number2 variable, and we'll also print that like that. Cool. So when we declared this variable before in the past, what we did is we just simply go print number and we say we want 4 to be the number 1 or number by putting it in position 1, which matches up with that, and then 6 to be the second number, which obviously matches up with this parameter here. Okay, we don't want to return anything, so we click void. Cool. So now when we run this, okay, 4 is obviously going to be printed as number because it's that in that position, and 6 is going to be printed as number 2 because it's in that position. Okay, so let's run that. Let's see what happens. Okay, so obviously, as we said, 4 is number and 6 is number 2. Cool. But with the name parameter, what we can actually do is we can actually specify what we want to pass in for each parameter. So it doesn't even have to be in the same order as we've done before. So say if I wanted to pass in number 2 first, I don't know why. In this scenario, we haven't given a specific reason why, but we just want to pass in number 2 first. So we pass in number 2 like that, and then for number 1 or number, we'll pass it in like that. Okay, cool. Okay, so in this instance, number 2 is over here, yeah, and we want it to go here. Okay, so we've used the name parameter to specify that we want number 2 to be 6. Okay, and we've used names parameters to specify that number is going to be 2. So if we print that out to the console, let's see what happens. As you can see, number 2 is 2, and number 6 is number 2 is 6, even though we put them in a different order there. Cool. Wow, this was a big one, guys. I really hope you learned more about methods like I promised. If you did, please make sure to smash the like button on the video. And if you want to learn more like this, please subscribe to the channel and make sure you look out for the next video on the playlist. Have a good day, guys. Peace.